Hello again, and welcome to Broadcasting Scotland. It's Sunday the 3rd of December. I'm Andrew Wilson, and this is the Full Scottish. This afternoon, I have the latest daily update from Ukraine on day 648 of the illegal Russian war of aggression and imperial ambition. Then I will introduce our guests for this afternoon, and then together we will take a look at the past week's news headlines from Scotland and around the world. Russian authorities are attempting to quell dissent from wives of soldiers deployed in Ukraine, the UK Ministry of Defence has said in its daily intelligence briefing, saying that some were being paid off whilst others have been discredited online. Russian shelling killed one civilian and destroyed two houses in the eastern town of Chasiv Yar yesterday, Ukraine's Interior Ministry said. Chasiv Yar is less than 5 kilometres west of the frontline city of Bakhmut, which Russia claims to have captured in May after a devastating months-long assault. Ukrainian border guards prevented the ex-president Petro Poroshenko from leaving the country on Friday because he planned to meet the Hungarian Prime Minister Viktor Orban, Kyiv's security services have said. Ukraine's SBU security service said the former leader, who was in power from 2014 to 2019, was turned back due to his planned meeting with Orban, known for his pro-Russian stance. Ukraine has become progressively stronger over the past year and will soon be able to reopen Kyiv's international airport, Volodymyr Zelensky's chief of staff, Andriy Yermak, said. Ukraine's energy ministry said that the Russian-occupied Zaporizhzhia nuclear power plant lost its power supply after the last remaining line to it from Ukrainian-controlled territory had been disrupted, but it has since been repaired. OSCE conference participants have accused Moscow of undermining the Vienna-based organisation. Latvia's representative, Katrina Kaktina, accused Russia of obstructing the OSCE agenda and of committing war crimes in Ukraine. And Ukraine is developing plans to allow spectators to attend sports stadiums. Its sports ministry is developing a system that will allow fans to attend stadiums and watch games, which have been off-limits to the public since Russia launched its full-scale invasion in February 2022. Now, we're lucky enough to be joined by two fantastic guests this afternoon on the Full Scottish. Campbell Gemmell has worked on the environment for 40 years, largely environment policy and regulation issues in the EU, Australasia and China. Professor Gemmell was Chief Executive of the Scottish Environment Protection Agency between 2003 and 2012. He chaired the review of Scotland's air quality strategy for the Scottish Government in 2019. He's visiting professor at Strathclyde University Law School, honorary professor at the University of Glasgow, and an adjunct professor at the Uni SA in Adelaide. Campbell, good afternoon. How are you keeping?
I'm good, thank you. I'm hoping you can hear me okay. We're having some digital sport here, but hopefully it all works.
We always do, Campbell, but we can hear you, thank you. And we're also joined by Stuart McMillan, who was first elected as the MSP as the SNP's MSP for Greenock in Inverclyde in May 2016 with a 53.7% vote share, and thereby becoming the first SNP member to win that constituency in the Scottish Parliament. During his time as an MSP, Stuart has led campaigns on a number of issues in Inverclyde, including a campaign to reduce the price of fuel, to improve the trunk road network, to increase marine tourism, and to tackle drug misuse. At present, Stuart is the convener of the Scottish Parliament's Delegated Powers and Law Reform Committee. Stuart is also the Scottish Parliament's parliamentary piper and plays the pipes at official functions for the Parliament. He's also, I'm told, participating in the 12 Days of Kiltness in support of the Ardgour Hospice, wearing the kilt every day for the 12 days in December. Stuart, good afternoon. How are you keeping?
Good afternoon. I'm fine, thank you very much. How are you doing yourself?
I'm very well, and I'm grateful to both of you for joining us on the Full Scottish this afternoon. Yesterday evening, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu held a press conference vowing to continue the ground assault with increasing force, saying it was the only way to achieve Israel's goals of eliminating Hamas and releasing our hostages. He said the IDF and security forces were continuing the ground incursion while upholding international law, a claim that has been repeatedly called into question by human rights observers and world leaders, including the Spanish Prime Minister just last week. However, the French President, Emmanuel Macron, appears to be pushing back on Israel's plan to continue attacking the people of Gaza until the total elimination of Hamas. Speaking at a press conference on the sidelines of the COP28 climate talks in Dubai, Macron said Israel risked unleashing a war for a decade. What is the total destruction of Hamas, and does anyone think it's possible? If it is, the war will last 10 years, Macron said yesterday. He went on, I think we're at a point where the Israeli authorities are going to have to define their objective and desired end state more precisely. After the Israeli army resumed shelling the Gaza Strip on Friday following the collapse of a week-long truce, Macron spoke of the need for stepped-up efforts to reach a lasting ceasefire in the conflict. So call for a pause, and at some point you expect a resumption of hostilities, but call for a ceasefire, and resumption of hostilities is a failure. Now that more than 15,000 Palestinians are said to have been killed, and of course between 1,200 and 1,400 Israelis were also killed, Stuart, is there any prospect for an immediate ceasefire?
It doesn't look likely, sadly, Andrew. I think the comments from President Macron are valid, and I would suggest are very much accurate. Now, when you look at what's happened over the last few days, with the resumption of shelling and the attacks, certainly with the Israeli shelling heading towards obviously kind of parts of the north, but also to southern parts of Gaza, particularly Khan Yunis in the south. Now, as we know, the Israeli government have been telling folk from Gaza to move to the south of Gaza. But if they are now shelling the south as well, that for me goes very much against what the Secretary of State Blinken has been calling for with regards to following humanitarian law, and I generally am concerned about the length of time that this will continue for. The longer it goes on, it's more death, it's more destruction, and also it will not, in my opinion, it will not actually achieve the end goal that the Israeli government want to see. It will actually only strengthen people who have got a deep sense of anger towards Israel, and that will only strengthen whether it's Hamas, but also other organisations akin to Hamas, and that cannot bring peace to the Middle East anytime soon.
Thanks, Stuart. And Campbell, I mentioned there the astonishing loss of innocent lives in Gaza and Israel. We've seen over the last few days the conflict spiralling and starting to spread to Syria and to the Lebanon and to the occupied West Bank. And we have seen reports this morning of a terrorist outrage in Paris last night in which a man was killed. So the same question, do you think in the light of those developments in terms of conflict, Campbell, do you think, is there any prospect of a ceasefire now?
It seems significantly less likely, to be honest. I mean, I'm far from an expert in this area. I'm more of a lay observer, but I have followed the story from when the conflict was rekindled through the various intifadas and the previous wars. It seems that these periodic terrible events simply exacerbate and continue the long-term horror that the people in the whole area experience. It's obvious that Hamas is a terrorist organization. It's evil. But does this help to deal with them? They're also clever. I suspect that many of their leaders will have found ways of evading the Israeli bombing. Meanwhile, what is horribly called the collateral damage is the murder of thousands of innocent women, children, and non-combatant males. It seems to propagate and perpetuate something that is a scar on all of us. And it's reassuring maybe that global leaders eventually have developed some moral courage to speak out against it. But it's been going on for days, weeks, decades, and we haven't found as yet, other than perhaps briefly the Oslo glorious Camp David events in the past. The sort of fibre between the various parts to realise that only talking ultimately will fix this. But by then, we will have lost so many lives, and that's just an ongoing and unholy tragedy.
Absolutely. Thanks, Campbell. Now, Tedros Adhanom Ghebreyesus, who's the Director General of the World Health Organization, has reiterated his calls for a ceasefire, describing the unimaginable scenes from a visit by a WHO team to a hospital in Gaza. He said the reports of ongoing hostilities and heavy bombardment in Gaza are petrifying. Yesterday, our team visited the Al Nasser Medical Hospital in the south. It was packed with 1,000 patients, 3 times over its capacity. Countless people were seeking shelter, filling every corner of the facility. Patients were receiving care on the floor, screaming in pain. These conditions are beyond inadequate. They are unimaginable for the provision of healthcare. I cannot find words strong enough to express our concern over what we are witnessing. Ceasefire now, he tweeted. And this morning, Al Jazeera is carrying a quote from UNICEF's global spokesperson, James Elder, who had this to say about conditions in the Al Nasser hospital, which is in Khan Yunis. He said, everywhere you turn to, there are children with third-degree burns, shrapnel wounds, brain injuries, and broken bones. Mothers crying over children who look as if they are hours away from death. It seems like a death zone right now. So humanitarian efforts to protect innocent women and children don't seem to be going anywhere at the moment. So Stuart, what do you think will it take to begin to protect them? It's estimated by the UN that 180 babies are being delivered in Gaza every day at the moment.
I think the international pressure is absolutely essential in this regard, that we are witnessing day in, day out the horrific scenes that we are seeing on television, on social media, but also with what we read in newspapers and also social media as well. But there has to be a growing sense of urgency from the international community. And I think over the last 24, 48 hours, I think some of the language from the US has changed. It's become a bit more stringent towards Israeli activities, and that I would suggest is very much it's a good thing, because Israel is very much backed by the US, as everyone knows, and that has been the case for many, many years. But fundamentally, this is about attempting to save lives. That the international community has got to consider more so the humanitarianism and about saving lives. Now, if that's 180 babies being born on a daily basis, that is, we cannot fathom how difficult that situation is going to be for the mothers, for the babies, but also for the families. And when babies are born, it should always be a joyous occasion. It's about bringing new life, new hope into the world. But the world that the people of Gaza are currently living in is certainly not one of hope. It's certainly not one of peace or prosperity. And I think the more and the sooner the international community speak louder to put pressure upon both Israel and also those who engage with Hamas, to put pressure upon Hamas as well, because we can't forget them, because they are part of this. So pressure's got to be brought on both to get to a ceasefire now, because ultimately, if that doesn't happen, it will be more death, more destruction, and more lives lost forever.
Thanks, Stuart. Now, Campbell, since Friday, Israeli forces started dropping leaflets showing a map of Gaza divided into thousands of numbered blocks. Each leaflet has a QR code which links to the map, and residents have been told to scan the QR code to identify their zone to be able to follow the Israeli army's instructions should they be targeting their house's zone. Of course, it's not easy for Palestinians to do that, given that they have almost no internet due to the bombardment and the cutting off of power and communication lines. There are also questions about where they will go, as tens of thousands of people, the estimates this morning are 1.8 million people internally displaced in Gaza now. The question is, where will they go in the south after fleeing from the north? So Campbell, what is the IDF doing when it sends Palestinians a map which identifies precisely the ghetto, and I use that word deliberately, to which they must move themselves and their families under threat of being blown up.
Yeah, I mean, it's terrifying, and it is, I suppose, controversial even to talk about it. It feels like cannot be sympathetic to one party. You have to be or for both. But you're right. Where do they go? Where could they go? And it feels as if the IDF is simply trying to drive the Palestinians into out of former Palestinian territory. And you can't unpick this. It goes back so far, to be honest. But it feels like, certainly I've seen on the references and versions of the fact that the leaflets were dropped 1 minute, and a few minutes later the aerial bombardments started. So where and when people are supposed to leave from, and they're leaving their homes. And that reference to the map and to previous activities in the 1930s and earlier in both Germany, Russia, Poland, etc. It feels as if we're revisiting some of the really darkest bits of human history, and I simply don't see how this is expected to get anywhere. And as Stuart was saying, it's not the kind of conditions babies should be, but it's not the kind of conditions anybody should be living in. And if those people, when they grow up, the babies grow up, are they going to be filled with love for Israel? And are they going to feel grievance about what has happened to the Palestinian people and their families? It just seems, again, that this is perpetuating a pretty evil situation. And the asymmetry of it, the disproportional nature of it, seems to me almost the worst attribute that we're encountering. And I'm very negative, as is probably fairly obvious. I simply cannot see how this ends well. The US does have leverage, clearly, and France and other voices are coming forward, which is good. But when, and how does that deal with that which has already happened? Stopping now is fine, but the environment as well as the people have been destroyed. Olive trees have been on the West Bank almond trees have been ripped up, properties have been destroyed, infrastructure has been destroyed, and blood has been. That's a pretty difficult situation to come back from, not in 10 years, but in generations.
Absolutely, Campbell. Thank you. Perpetuating evil is a very good way of encapsulating it, I think. But Stuart, last night Sky News was reporting that the UK will conduct surveillance flights over Israel and Gaza as part of hostage rescue efforts. The Ministry of Defence has said that the surveillance aircraft will be unarmed, does not have a combat role, and will be tasked solely to locate hostages. Only information relating to hostage rescue will be passed to the relevant authorities responsible for hostage rescue, the MOD said in a statement. These flights will take place over the eastern Mediterranean, including operating in airspace over Israel and Gaza. The MOD has said that the UK government has been working with partners across the region to secure the release of hostages, including British nationals, who have been kidnapped since the Hamas attacks on the 7th of October. So, Stuart, Westminster says the drone flights are to look for hostages, but what information do you think that will then be being passed to the IDF, who are the authorities responsible for hostage rescue? And what does this say about the Westminster's position when there are British nationals who are hostages now, but there are also British nationals still trapped in Gaza by the Israeli attacks?
Okay, Andrew, you touched upon earlier on the number of people who are displaced. Is it 1.8 million people from their homes? And also the fact that since this conflict started, the message was to move from the north to the south of Gaza. Now that the parts of the south are being bombed, also by the Israelis, these drones are not going to be able to determine from the over 2 million people who live in Gaza. They're not going to be able to determine who is a hostage and who is a civilian. And anyone else who's actually in the territory. So I'm extremely sceptical, to say the least, in terms of what the UK government are going to do here. I just think it's I think it's a nonsense, to be quite frank with you. because I am no expert in defence matters, but I've read enough to know that what tends to happen is that the hostages will not be kept in the one place. They will move around. Now there will still be locations, I would assume, that hostages will go from point A to point B. Now, are the drones going to be able to determine when you've actually got so many folk on the roads or on basically walking around, trying to go from a place of danger to an alleged place of safety? I don't think so, to be quite frank with you.
Thank you, Stuart. Now then, we'll move on, because COP28 in the UAE has opened with a historic agreement on loss and damage, but is it enough? New funding to provide clean and reliable energy in 3 African countries has been announced by the First Minister, Hamza Yusuf, at COP28. Speaking at an Under 2 Coalition General Assembly earlier yesterday, the First Minister confirmed funding for 2 initiatives to provide affordable and clean energy through the Scottish Government's International Development Fund. Operating theatre service Kidsor is to receive £325,000 for solar energy. I'm sorry, 2 seconds. Okay. My apologies. As Campbell said, we've got some digital sports this morning. Let me continue. The operating theatre service Kidsor is to receive £325,000 for solar energy installation at 15 children's operating theatres across Malawi, Zambia and Rwanda to provide a clean and reliable power source, which will dramatically reduce hospital carbon emissions. The Scottish Government will also provide £250,000 to enable financing of mini-grids to increase access to electricity in Zambia and to help accelerate access to clean cooking methods in Rwanda. So, Campbell, are you with us now?
Yes, if you can hear me, I can hear you.
Yep, we can. So, Campbell, are these investments by the Scottish Government, are they an example of how every government across the world can contribute practical and impactful assistance in other areas of the world which need it most? Or, as some unionists would have it, is this simply virtue signalling by the First Minister who has ideas above his station and won't stay in his appointed lane?
Okay. I think they're really good activities to be supporting and investing. And I mean, Scotland's been doing this for some considerable time. A lot of effort went in by government and various agencies and volunteers actually into Malawi over many years. And I think the support that's been proposed here is also very good. I mean, my expressions of any negativity about it are not in relation to the doing of it at all. They're really about the scale of it and that which is needed globally for the kind of transition that we have to accomplish and the speed at which we have to accomplish if we're to get anywhere close to what is required. And I mean, this week the announcement already, or at the beginning of the weekend, of the sort of loss and damage support is also excellent. But it's the transition as well as dealing with the harms already in place, as it were, that we have to push forward together. And it is a small p, if not a large p, political point. These sums of money that you were talking about there from Scotland are excellent, but they're in the less than $1 million often category. And the UK support into the sort of compensation fund is around 60 million. Meanwhile, the support in the UK, and this is according to OECD figures, is around about 13 billion in the last year to the oil and gas industry. So the subsidies that are provided to oil and gas, which have actually, in the term of the Conservative administration, have gone from about 10 to 20 billion pounds per annum, totally dwarfs this level of investment in support for countries that are experiencing the most acute end and have least contribution to the problems that global climate is causing. So There's again something that's a wee bit out of kilter here. It's fantastic that expertise and funds are being put in to support emerging states and those who are in need, but we are quite a long way off spending the amount of money that even Nicholas Stern said in 2006-7. 1% of GDP was what we could spend if we spent it then. What we need to spend now is already far, far greater. And whilst some of these investments grab headlines, and I'm not having a go at the Scottish government, I think it's governments globally, they can sound good. It's really good if they actually do spend it rather than just announce it. And it's even better if they see that as the beginning of a much bigger investment over the long term, because that's what's needed. And it needs to peak really soon, not dribble out.
That's a great message, Campbell, there. Thank you very much. Now, Stuart, C40 cities will receive £1 million from Scotland's Climate Justice Fund to focus efforts on tackling loss and damage in marginalised communities. The Scottish Government, in partnership with the direct funding charity Give Directly, will also provide a further £1 million from the fund to support communities in Malawi to deal with the impact of climate-induced loss and damage. C40 Cities is a global network of nearly 100 mayors committed to halving their fair share of emissions by 2030. And the Scottish Government will work with C40 Cities through their Inclusive Climate Action Programme to address urban loss and damage and support sub-Saharan Africa's first local just transition process. The latest funding allocations fulfil the commitment to treble the Climate Justice Fund to £36 million over the course of the current Parliament. So, Stuart, while Scotland's government was, I think, one of the first to commit actual cash to climate justice, is there yet sufficient action and funding behind the efforts to tackle loss and damage due to the climate crisis in communities that are marginalised?
So I think one of the points that Campbell touched upon a few moments ago was regarding the pledging versus the spending. And he's absolutely right. So, I mean, this week we've seen £330 million worth being pledged with regards to loss and damage. But we know that with the various COPs that have happened, pledges have taken place. But then when the analysis then takes place beyond that, there always seems to be a bit of a lag, to say the least, in terms of the money actually being spent. So I'm involved in something called the Commonwealth Parliamentary Association. Every parliamentarian in the Commonwealth automatically becomes a member of this. I'm on our branch executive committee, but I'm also on the International Executive Committee. We had a recent conference in Ghana only a few months ago. And one of the workshops that was there was that I chose to go to was with regards to the environment and energy. And I genuinely was really heartened by colleagues from different parts of the Commonwealth with regards to the amount of investment that seems to be going in, but also the desire for more investment to go in with regards to renewable energy projects to help with also the local communities and also to help make sure that people's lives are actually a lot better. So I know with the engagement I've got with colleagues from the Commonwealth, the desire is there, the wish is there, there are projects there. There will be projects there are plenty, to say the least, but it is now about the money. And the fact that the Scottish Government have led on this, also the former First Minister was very much at the vanguard of this in COP26 in Glasgow. And I'm pleased that the Scottish Government have continued to pursue this and to put money behind various projects. And certainly the two projects that you referenced earlier on, Andrew, I very much welcome, because these are projects that will make an absolute difference to people's lives, which is crucial. It's not about giving money to government and the money, something may or may not happen to it. The Scottish Government have always been very clear when it comes to investment into other countries, particularly when it comes to international aid. And certainly with the loss and damage, with the money that's going to be invested in Malawi, Rwanda, and also Zambia, I very much welcome the fact that we will see the delivery. The money will go in, we will see what's actually happened, we will see the delivery, and we know that these projects will benefit people.
Thanks, Stuart. Now, Campbell, COP28 has been criticised by some for being hosted in an oil-producing state, and reportedly for that oil-producing state planning to use the event as cover for striking commercial deals to extract more oil and more gas from around the world. But what do you think of the chances of COP28 achieving a substantial agreement on increasing renewable energy production and perhaps even getting the world back on track to limit the increase in global temperatures to 1.5 degrees?
What are the chances? I'm cynical. I would say the chances are low. I mean, the COP26 was held in an oil-producing country, and we are still having a political debate at the UK level, as well as at the Scottish level, about whether or not we should continue to support the oil and gas industry. We'd have to grasp this nettle and behave ourselves. We have to get the point that these COPs have been going on for the best part of 30 years. There have been lots of pledges, and our emissions, other than briefly during the COVID period, have carried on going up. The emissions have to come down, and they have to come down dramatically if we are to have any hope of getting close, I would say now, to 2 rather than 1.5 degrees. Opportunities have been missed repeatedly, and it depends how long you think you're going to live, and it depends what kind of life you think you and your children and your grandchildren want to have. There will still be economic activity and there will still be life, but conditions will be considerably harder, even if we did start to migrate, turn, whatever, back towards the trajectory that was originally intended to stay below 1.5. So I'm not at all sure. I think there will be announcements, there will be opportunities for the protocols, there will be commitments and pledges, and there will be large amounts of money talked about. There were some of those in Paris, there were some of those in Copenhagen, there were some of those in Glasgow. I'm not quite sure what happened with 27 in Sharm el-Sheikh. I think that was pretty pointless. But giving the profile to an oil and gas nation that is so acute and also has some other issues that some of us might be concerned about, is, I think, a bit like some FIFA decisions, something that might be regretted and perhaps wasn't the wisest. However, those nations, those economies, have got some of the largest amounts of funds available, partly because of the oil and gas industry. But it would be lovely to see them actually behave more like a Norway, and try and use this not only for a sovereign investment fund that invests in infrastructure and social care and other things within their own country, but tries to deliver a just transition and equalities and human rights across the planet. And I frankly wouldn't have started that process in the Gulf. And so my expectations are low. But this is a mission where many of us have got bruises across our foreheads from repeatedly banging away at this and trying to bring about improvements. And some progress has been made, but we are still, I've used this metaphor before, but we're still hacking about in the rough, and we need to get not only back onto the fairway, but we need to get some of our best clubs out and really target our effort and get on with it quickly. And this may just be another dot along the line, and I await a COP where it's not hosted by big capital, it's actually hosted by communities, and it's hosted by technologists who have got the funds that they can connect to make the delivery a reality. And at this point, I don't know if I'll live that long. I hope I do, but I'm not sure.
Absolutely. Thank you, Campbell. And Stuart, I was going to ask you a little bit more about the politics and the presentation of COP28, because it struck me that it's been somewhat in contrast to COP26. What I mean is that COP28 has opened with announcements of significant agreements, whereas at COP26 they only appeared at the very, very end. So does that suggest to you that COP28 has had better diplomatic preparations, or is it just better stage management?
Good question. I don't know, to be quite honest with you. I think certainly COP26. I think a lot of the hard work will have been done at that point. Now, I also think, I mean, a lot of the dialogue that will have taken place over the last couple of years followed on from COP26. So I think I'd like to think that's possibly helped out, to be quite honest. But at the same time, I am also very wary about COP28 and what the final outcome will be, because I mean, sort of one of the announcements that's happened has been sadly this announcement regarding the nuclear energy industry, and to have more energy being produced in the future from nuclear. Now, my concern about nuclear, it's always been the same. I mean, it is cleaner, of course, as compared to fossil fuels. But my issue about nuclear is very much about the storage of nuclear waste. So if we end up having more countries producing nuclear energy and generating nuclear energy, that then means that there will be more nuclear waste depositories across the world. And I don't think that's a healthy thing to leave future generations.
Thanks, Stuart. Let's move on now, because at the UK COVID inquiry this week, Matt Hancock blamed pretty much everyone else but himself for getting it wrong. England's former health secretary and sometime reality TV performer faced a 2-day grilling at the official inquiry into the pandemic on Thursday and Friday, and there was plenty of fodder for his legion of detractors, plus some punchy defence from the man himself. Hancock quit the government in a scandal after a coronavirus rule-breaching affair with an aide was exposed, but he's rarely been out of the headlines since. An unauthorised stint in the Australian jungle for reality TV saw him kicked out of the Tory party, while the leak by notorious right-wing hack Isabel Oakeshott of thousands of his private WhatsApps from earlier this year cast a very unflattering light on the government he served in. But the inquiry has now seen Hancock take a trashing. The ex-number 10 Downing Street aide Dominic Cummings called Hancock a proven liar. Former Cabinet Secretary Helen McNamara said that Hancock would say things in meetings that we'd discover weren't in fact the case. And the top government scientist Patrick Vallance argued that Hancock had a habit of saying things without evidence to back them up. Hancock, of course, came armed with some new information. He told the inquiry that in a call with Johnson on the 13th of March, he had directly argued that the Prime Minister should call an immediate lockdown. Now, that revelation wasn't included in his Pandemic Diaries book, which he co-created with Oakeshott, and Hancock sought to explain that with saying that the new information came to light after he'd written the book. But Hugo Keith, KC, for the inquiry, said the inquiry had no evidence to back this assertion up. And when he was asked if he could prove it, Hancock simply said he remembered the phone call. Watching along at home, the former Health Secretary's arch enemy, Dominic Cummings, tweeted that this was a direct lie, although an ally of Hancock then texted Politico to argue that Cummings is not a reliable witness and this tweet is wrong. Some would say it remains a mystery wrapped in an enigma inside a riddle that it was the revelation by the son of Hancock's affair with his communications advisor, Gina Coladangelo, whom he had appointed to a paid role in the Department of Health, that caused Hancock's downfall. Arguably, the WhatsApp messages, and now his evidence to the inquiry, confirm what political observers spotted a long time ago. The person with whom Matt Hancock is deeply and enduringly in love with is Matt Hancock. It takes a truly remarkable type of human being to make Hancock's claim that his affair with Coladangelo was arguably charitable. But of course, Hancock did so with his characteristic Alan Partridge energy. So, Campbell, in light of the evidence to the inquiry that we've heard this week, should we as a society consider taking steps to prevent politically ambitious Alan Partridges who want from being appointed to positions of power for which they are clearly wholly unqualified?
That was very good. How to respond to that? The snogger, serial liar, misinvestor of public funds, and general self-publicist is clearly somebody that can't be relied on for anything. And I'm kind of reminded a wee bit of the one point in the West Wing where there's an observation that somebody to stand for the president has to have the most enormous hubris in order to think that they are the one to take on this position. And that's how you end up with Donald Trump, as well as, arguably, somebody with the intellectual capability and quality of Barack Obama. So you pays your money. But it is alarming that we seem, over the last 13 years or so in particular, to have dredged deeper at every stage into the cesspit of political ambition, and ended up with people who are patently, completely and utterly incompetent, and who, I can't use the word probably, but who really don't give a proverbial about the average punter, despite the fact that the average punter seems to be predisposed to believe them and elect them. It blew my mind that, you know, the kind of ex-steel workers who were unemployed, the blue-collar workers of the eastern seaboard, Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, etc., would vote for a Trump, but they did. And people in the north of England who had previously not voted Conservative voted for the landslide victory that was given to that other blonde-headed idiot. So I don't know. I don't know how you stop people having the ambition to lead, and some of them with enormous hubris, like Blair, were for a significant period of their term very successful and did some really impressive things. But they also run the risk of not paying any attention to people who are smarter than them, who tell them that what they're about to do is not just stupid, but really, really dangerous, and will have a very long tail of impact on it. So, yeah, it's a tricky one. I'd love to know what the answer is, but I think we're probably with Churchill, that democracy is the worst possible system apart from all the others.
That's a great quote. Thank you, Campbell. Now, as night follows day, Hancock's attacks on Nicola Sturgeon were jumped on by the media in Scotland. He told the COVID inquiry on Friday morning that Ms Sturgeon had confused the public during the pandemic. Hancock also claimed that Ms Sturgeon would announce decisions sooner than had been agreed to. Now, a spokesperson for the former First Minister said there is not a scrap of evidence for Matt Hancock's claims. He should be taking responsibility for his own decisions, as Nicola will do when she gives evidence to the inquiry next year, rather than seeking to blame others. So first, let's take a quick look at a video clip of Nicola Sturgeon speaking in our Parliament on the 22nd of February 2022.
First Minister.
Well, firstly, there isn't conflict on these issues. There is a UK government that is failing to take decisions in an orderly and a competent fashion, and that is the reality. As recently as Friday, we fully expected that yesterday the UK government would set out in detail the testing infrastructure it intended to retain and the funding that would accompany that. I had two conversations yesterday with Michael Gove. In between those conversations, a UK cabinet meeting was postponed because they were still having conflict amongst themselves. Now, I deeply regret that because it has a knock-on effect on Scottish Government decision-making, and I hope they get their act together, and I hope they get their act together quickly. And Jackie Baillie is right to point to the fact that public health responsibilities are devolved, but that takes us to the very heart of the issue. Public health decisions are devolved, but decisions that determine how much resource is available to Scotland, to Wales and to Northern Ireland flow only from public health decisions that are taken for England by the UK government. Now, that's a system I don't defend because I think it is unacceptable and unsustainable, but it's a system that Jackie Baillie and her party, unfortunately and regrettably, do defend.
So, Stuart, having listened to that video and listened to Matt Hancock's accusations, for which the First Minister says there is not a scrap of evidence, do you think, did Nicola Sturgeon's careful, methodical and regular daily briefings, which of course so enraged Jackie Baillie and George Fawkes, amongst others, did they confuse the public? Did they confuse you?
No, the fact that Nicola Sturgeon led from the front on a daily basis, the messaging was clear, it was concise, and also, as we know, I mean, it was an extremely difficult period of time in all of our lives. Information was changing on a regular basis, but Nicola Sturgeon, as I said, led from the front. And when I was out campaigning, and even since that period of time, engaging with members of my constituency, even folk who don't vote for the SNP and folk who don't support independence, the amount of people that said to me that they were really impressed by Nicola Sturgeon and her leadership, and with that particular direct comparison to the chaos that was coming from Westminster on a daily basis. And some of the, as we know, I mean, some of the the press conferences that took place by the UK government were just shambolic, to say the least. Whereas that was not the case here in Scotland. I think, kind of going back to the point about Matt Hancock, I mean, it's fair to say that Matt Hancock has got absolutely no credibility left at all. And to be a wee bit flippant for a moment, I would suggest that the writers of Yes Minister probably couldn't make up the script that we've actually seen with regards to Matt Hancock and some of the nonsense that he was actually involved with over that period of time and also since. But kind of going back to being serious, I generally think that the public are not daft. The public are not stupid. They saw that leadership. They saw that clarity day in, day out from the Scottish Government, in contrast to the utter nonsense and shambles that we saw from Westminster. And obviously the former First Minister will take part in the UK COVID inquiry and also the Scottish inquiry, and she will obviously answer the questions that are put to her. And I've got absolutely no doubt whatsoever that the former First Minister will be once again clear and concise with the answers that she will present at those two inquiries.
Thank you, Stuart. Now then, a new poll has put support for Yes at 54%, and the SNP lead over Labour in double digits at both Westminster and Holyrood. Ipsos Mori, in conjunction with STV News, conducted a poll based on a sample of 1,004 adults aged 16 and over between the 20th and the 26th of November. Support for Yes in the poll is not only at 54% and 46% for No, and has increased since, and that of course has increased since Ipsos's last survey in May, when it was at 53%. The poll also suggests that slightly more men than women back Yes among the respondents, with 50% of men and 46% of women stating that they would vote Yes. So, Campbell, I'm sure that the unionist parties and their client media will claim surprise at this latest polling, but are you surprised?
I'm not surprised, and to be honest, I'm pleased to see that we're perhaps, I don't know how long it will last, but we're maybe in slightly more stable times than the turbulence we've gone through. But it does connect, I think, to the COVID inquiry and to the previous conversation about Hancock and Johnson and the mayhem of the UK government. Your point about the client media, I think, is fundamental. When we are repeatedly fed any piece of nonsense, including on BBC's Reporting Scotland flagship programme, we hear all manner of things about things that are slanted in any way to criticise the behaviour of the Scottish Government and in particular the SNP. And I'm not a card carrier, but I find it extraordinary that despite all of that hostility, there is still such a very strong support for independence and for the party. I think even the coverage that BBC in Scotland managed to achieve around the death of Lord Darling, celebrating the unionist hero and really rubbing that point home. I mean, he was, I'm sure, a fine fellow, but he was somewhere between the architect and the proponent of the most disastrous divisive campaigning that lied endlessly and was supported by the media in doing that to convince the Scots they would get something wonderful if they made the right vote. And now we find that discussions about energy are very much focused on how it can be sold out of Scotland. I wouldn't be surprised if water follows on a similar path again, especially depending on what happens with the next elections at the UK level. So I'm not surprised, but it's part of a journey rather than a destination at this point.
Thanks, Campbell. Now, this morning, Keir Starmer has praised Margaret Thatcher for effecting meaningful change in Britain in an article directly appealing to Conservative voters to switch to Labour. Writing in the Sunday Telegraph, he said that Thatcher had set loose our natural entrepreneurialism during her time as Prime Minister. Sharing his reaction to Starmer's comments on X-Twitter this morning, the First Minister said, "What Thatcher did to mining and industrial communities was not entrepreneurialism, it was vandalism. Starmer praising Thatcher is an insult to those communities in Scotland and across the UK who still bear the scars of her disastrous policies. Now, Stuart, last night you tweeted Labour leader praising Margaret Thatcher. That will go down well in hashtag Inverclyde. So just how badly will Starmer's latest message go down with voters in Inverclyde?
Well, to put it this way, Inverclyde's population used to be 120,000. It's now 77, just over 77,500 people. And that changed from 1979 when the shipyards started to go. They didn't go immediately. I think we all accept that. But when they started to go in the 1980s, many people left because they had to leave. They had to do what Norman Tebbit told them to do, to get on their bike to go and find work. And a lot of people did that, and they never came back. If I look at Inverclyde's population now, Inverclyde's got an older population. It's got a growing older population. We are the most acute in the country. We have not recovered from the decimation of the shipbuilding industry and also the engineering industry that we had at that point, and also all the other businesses that dealt with them. So the fact that we are still struggling as a local area, as an economy, to deal with that so-called entrepreneurial change that Sir Keir Starmer thinks was a wonderful thing by Margaret Thatcher. The fact we're still struggling with that actually tells a story. And I can assure you, I will be reminding constituents of this day in, day out, week in, week out in the months ahead. Because the fact you've actually got a Labour leader praising Margaret Thatcher is it's appalling. It's not something I ever would have thought that I would have seen in my lifetime.
Thanks, Stuart. Now, Campbell, it's maybe notable this morning that George Fawkes is strangely silent. Perhaps he's reflecting on how this meaningful change destroyed the futures of countless thousands of his own former constituents. But I was going to ask you, Campbell, is Sir Keir Starmer, is he the new Margaret Hilda Thatcher?
What a terrifying thought. And I've seen some interesting graphics that have worked that up rather nicely. I mean, there are also some signs of backpedaling in that he's got one foot stuck in this sort of converted and hopefully he thinks reconverted blue wall community in the north of England that he must get back. And his other foot is on, trying to be progressive in former Labour traditions. And it just doesn't add up. And he was praising her for vision. Now, that vision to me was one of total destruction of anything that she didn't like and that her monetarist financial advisors told her that she should be going for. What's his vision? What is he offering? Is it just Tory mild? And given how far right the Conservative Party has gone, is that somewhere almost back towards the middle? It's obviously not Corbyn Labour, and it's not even Attlee Labour. That would be nice, but I've no idea. I've no idea what he's doing. I think I know what he's trying to do, which is to keep everybody happy. And given how grey he is, he makes John Major look colourful. I'm beginning to wonder if he's doing what he's being advised to do. It ain't working for me, that's for sure. And like Inverclyde, I suspect there'll be quite a lot of Scots who have Labour roots, even if they are strongly supportive of a more communitarian and national agenda that other parties now offer. I hate my doots.
I think we all hear doots, Campbell. You're absolutely right. And Stuart, I was going to ask you about the politics now on these islands, if I can use that phrase for a moment, when it now seems that what you need to do to win an election in England is exactly diametrically the opposite of what you need to do to win an election in Scotland, i.e. claiming to be channeling the ghost of Margaret Thatcher.
Well, it's true that the fact that Scotland and England are different. Scotland is different from England, it's different from Wales and also Northern Ireland. And genuinely, I mean, Sir Keir Starmer's comments, not just over the last 24 hours, but certainly in recent months as well, it just highlights that he's so far out of touch and doesn't understand Scotland, he doesn't understand Wales or Northern Ireland. And his focus is purely about the red wall to try to get these seats back. Now, I don't think actually get into kind of former coal mining communities and saying actually, yeah, Thatcher was a visionary, and yeah, you should be coming back to vote for Labour. I don't see how that's going to work tremendously well in some of these constituencies. But that's obviously for Sir Keir Starmer and his advisors to determine. But I just think, I mean, I'm 51. I've seen the decimation of Thatcher's legacy. I've seen it in my community. I saw how bad Inverclyde was when the shipyards went and when the shipyards were being brought down and for different things to then go in their place. But it destroyed, not just destroyed communities, it destroyed families. And if that's the vision that the Labour Party want to put forward at the upcoming UK election, then bring it on, because I can assure you, communities like Inverclyde and other parts of the west central belt of Scotland, where the communities and families were destroyed because of that so-called vision that Sir Keir Starmer now actually thinks is a good thing. Well, yeah, I say bring it on, because yeah, we'll take the fight to them, and that will certainly help the SNP keep some of these seats and potentially win even more seats.
Thanks, Stuart. And now we've got a final item here, because Scotland are no strangers to facing formidable opponents in the opening game of a major tournament, having come up against the might of reigning world champions Brazil in the Stade de France in Paris in 1998, but taking on the hosts Germany in front of a sellout crowd in the 70,000 capacity Allianz Arena in Munich in the curtain raiser for Euro 2024 finals on Friday the 14th of June will perhaps be the toughest test the national team has faced in a very long time. So firstly, Campbell, is Scotland kicking off the Euros against the hosts Germany? Is it an opportunity for Scotland on the world stage?
Absolutely, yes, and go Stevie. He's done remarkably well as a manager, has Mr. Clark, and we sort of restored some faith and managed to get decent teams out there on a number of occasions. I think it's fabulous, and I wish them really well. Hungary and Switzerland as well. Maybe slightly better opportunities and scope there, but it'll be really interesting, and I think it's just great to give some profile. And Munich has very good beer, so yeah, fingers crossed.
That's a good point, Campbell. Edinburgh is, of course, lucky enough to be twinned with Munich. But Stuart, the same question for you. Is this an opportunity for Scotland on the world stage to be kicking off the Euros against the hosts, Germany?
Es ist wunderbar. I studied in Dortmund, and so just one wee point, Dortmund's got very fine beer as well. But I think it's going to be a wonderful occasion. I remember the France '98. I was fortunate to get to there. I went to the Scotland-Norway game. But that opening game of the tournament will be outstanding. It will be, whatever the result, for Scotland to be involved in that match against the host nation, and it's just going to be incredible. We will never have experienced anything like this before, and I can't wait. I'm really looking forward to it. I would love to get back out to Germany at some point. Thankfully, there's only one game that's a Parliament Day, so who knows? I might manage to get out there, but if not, then certainly, like many other thousands and millions of Scots, I'll be watching on the television and cheering on Stevie and the boys.
Thanks, Stuart. But I'm afraid that's all that we have time for. Yes, Campbell, go on.
I was just going to say, can I also say there's a great opportunity, given my Scandinavian connections, to cheer on Denmark in their group as well.
Absolutely. That's a very good point, and I'm sure that's what's going to happen. Thanks, Campbell. But I'm afraid that's all that we have time for this afternoon. In making these programmes, Broadcasting Scotland depends on the generosity of viewers and others who value our distinctive approach to news, current affairs and culture. Please help us to continue to make these programmes and to develop the station. Our programmes will always be free to view, but if you can afford £5 a month, please consider becoming a Broadcasting Scotland supporter. Our need to reach our £30,000 target to continue to pay our bills is still really pressing. However, the generosity of supporters has given us a little more time. So far, we've raised over £21,000, but we will be able. But we need to. But in order to continue to make programmes, we need to raise the remaining £9,000, and that need is really urgent. To everyone who has donated and to everyone who has signed up to make a regular monthly payment as a Broadcasting Scotland supporter, thank you very much. There are other ways in which you can contribute to our work. If you'd like to volunteer to work with Broadcasting Scotland, either behind the scenes or in front of the cameras or in any other way, then please visit our website at www.broadcastingscotland.scot and send us a message there. We will be back at 7 p.m. sharp tomorrow evening for the next edition of Scotland at 7, so please come and join us then. I'd like to say thank you to everyone who's been watching this afternoon, and of course to say a very special thanks to our very special guests, Professor Campbell Gemmell and Stuart McMillan, MSP. Thanks, guys.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you both, and please look after yourselves, and please have a very peaceful weekend. Bye-bye.